In this video, we're going to be taking a look at our tertiary forms, and we're going to be finishing up our detail pass on the sculpt. So I'm going to show you a few different techniques on what we can do inside of ZBrush to get the tertiary forms onto our model. The first thing I was going to show you is the use of the Orb Brush set. If we open up that brush set, and I've got through Lightbox, just the hotkey, opening up that with the command key, I can go to the different brushes that Orb has, and he's got a really nice one for this rock detail, and I'll just double click on that to load that. And you can see I've already kind of used it in this area. This has got the drag rectangle stroke type on here, which is going to make it very easy for us to click and drag onto the surface. Now I do have symmetry on. For this I might tap X, turn symmetry off, but you can see if we can click and drag, and if we take our cursor and rotate it this way, you can actually rotate the stamp that's on there. So it's set at a pretty nice level. If the detail level is too high for you, you can take the Z intensity and then drop that down just maybe a little bit lower. So it's really up to you what the level that you're kind of looking for on this. I'm just going to tap solo, tap Alt S, that's the hotkey I've set up for this, and just go through on that. Now if you don't want this to go on the back side of your model, sometimes I'll use this backface mask and it'll make sure it'll only stamp something on the front and you never have to worry about it pushing through on the back side. So sometimes that becomes kind of important. You do have to be a little bit careful about this. You can see how much this changed the silhouette of this, so I might drop back down that intensity just a little bit and through there like this. And another thing that I like to do before doing all this is if we store a morph target, that will freeze the shape of this before we've started. So if there's anything that I don't like if I just drag out a few of these strokes and I don't like what's being produced here, I can use the morph brush down here and I can basically erase out whatever that thing is that I've sculpted inside of here. So sometimes that can be kind of cool to do some detail pass, and then I'll make my brush size a little bit smaller, and you can see it almost feels like we're erasing out to nothing. So it kind of feels like we're chipping away at the model for that. And it's possible that you could use alphas with this too. So if you wanted an even harder edge kind of look to this, if you're eroding away the stone back to that part, it's possible to use that as a technique for this. So let's look at another one of the orb brushes from the Orb Brush set. Let's tap, I'm going to tap the command key. I've already shown in a previous video how you can set up the Windows shortcut, so you can place this within the brush area, so you can just make it really easy to load up the brushes for this. So I'm just going to use this Orb Rock Noise. Double click on that to load that up. And this brush has got a spray on here, so it actually takes the brush and then kind of pushes it out all over the place. Now for me, that's really super heavy, so I'm going to drop this down a bit. I only want just a little bit of surface noise on here, so I'll just kind of push in through here like that. And I'm just going to try to hit the surface to where there's just not completely zero detail on there whatsoever. So again, if we push back from this distance, it should just be barely visible, and I think that's a good marker for you. You don't want it super strong, and if you make it too strong, it starts to overpower the medium level detail that you have there. So since I've already loaded up the other brush, I can just tap the B key, and then this should show up in the previous brushes, or this quick pick area. So let's double click this and then maybe add a little bit of this to this area. Okay, so this is loading up the Orb Brush set. There's also a brush with inside of ZBrush. If you go to B and then N for noise, you can go to the noise brush. So this one's pretty nice as well. You just got to be a little bit careful with this. If you're too heavy-handed with it, I'll make my brush size pretty large. You can see we can really tear up the mesh quite a bit. And I'm just going to do this. I'm going to keep deleting a morph target, and then I'll store a new morph target and just say I'm happy with this state where I'm at. That way it gives me the ability to always erase out the detail if I get a little too heavy-handed with this. So I'm going to kind of roughly, just actually lightly pull on the surface just a little bit, maybe roughen up some corners But this definitely has a particular look to this brush. And again, I might want to put back face masking on so it doesn't go to the back side of whatever we're working on. So let's kind of lightly hit that up and through there. In this area, try to get a little more detail on there. And then I might take the layer brush and then put this on maybe the square, and then tap U to go to my intensity and drop this back. Let's find an intensity level to raise this up. Maybe just right in through here. So I'm trying to build that surface back up to where I had it. I'll just do a little bit of this, and then maybe hit trim dynamic to try to balance some of this out right through there, like that. So just got to be a little bit careful with, again, how much detail that you introduce to the surface here like this. The other thing is, we could always, if you kind of want to push this back a little bit, we can hold down Control, paint a mask on a particular area like this, and then I'll just hold down Control, click on the open viewport to invert it, hold down Control to click on the mask to soften it, and then I'll just use the clay polish and maybe hit that once or twice, and that will kind of push that detail level back a little bit and then stylize it just slightly. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to delete the morph target, store another one, hold this state, kind of happy with where that's at. I'm going to go to surface, and I'm going to go to noise, and then there's a basically a noise plugin for this, and there's a lot of different types of noise that we can use for this. I'm going to go to the noise plug area right here, and then click on that, and I'm going to just click on erosion and then try that. I'm going to hit OK for that, and this should give us some sort of preview for this. So it's gonna take this basic noise strength, and I can pull that down to 0. That's just like a little kind of bubbly kind of noise. I can also just zoom in on this like ZBrush's normal controls. And then there's a strength, and if I pull that down or up, depending on which way you want to go with it, you can see what we've got going on for this erosion type that we've got. We can also take the scale, and we could play around with the X and the Y and the Z scale. We could play around with that a little bit. Okay, and you can see how that kind of changes things. And then there's also the plugin scale. So if you want to make it really large, you could do that. If you want to pull that down a bit, you could do that as well. So just find some kind of area that feels good to you. And then this is for that that basic noise. So if you want to add basic noise to this, you can see how what that does here by mixing that. I'm just not a big fan of that. I'll go ahead and hit OK. And what it's doing right now, it's actually just a preview right now. And if we go and say apply to mesh, it will actually take those changes and then bake it into the model. Now you can see that that's a really strong pattern all over the entire model. Maybe you want that. What I would suggest is not doing that. We store the morph target before we started. And if we use the switch button, it's going to switch it back and forth between the two different states. So this is the state of the model as we store the morph target, and then this is the state after we added the noise. If I push switch and go back to the original state when we first stored that morph target, I can go to the morph brush, and then I can make my brush size a little bit larger, and then I can just start to sculpt in exactly where I want some of that detail to fall. So this way it gives you a little bit more control over that process and how you add some of that detail in. Again, I think less is probably more in this situation, and you got to be a little bit careful. If you add a little bit too much of this tertiary detail onto your model, what you can end up doing is overpowering the medium level detail, and you might have to go back through and then resculpt some of the details of your medium level. So just keep that in mind and be aware about that. But I think I'm going to say that this is enough on this model. I'll hit solo, bring everything back, and I should have a camera position already stored on here. And I'll just go ahead and hit Shift R to do a best possible render. So that's how I'm going to be using those techniques to add tertiary details to this design.